How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Alloved's guide series on Curse of Strahd, a 5th edition module. In today's video, we'll be diving into Krezk, a city that is being closed off from the world, and probably for good reasons. Of course, there's going to be a ton of spoilers, so players that plan on playing in Curse of Strahd do not watch this, but DMs that want an insight on how we can run this thing, go ahead and stick around because we have a lot to cover. And here we are, Krezk. Awesome art, James RPG art, use it. So your players, after going a certain distance, they're going to see that there's a winding road that leads to a walled settlement. This is very interesting. If you are running the campaign where your players arrived in the village of Barovia, and then eventually went to the village of Valaki, and then eventually come here, they'll see an interesting dynamic. They'll see the village of Barovia, a smaller settlement, completely unwalled. Then they'll go to Valaki, which seems a lot more built up, and has a wood palisade all around. And then they'll come to this place, and of course they're going to see that there's a stone wall, and there's a veritable forest beyond. So it's very interesting to see the change of technologies and different styles of living that these people all have. Even though they do live relatively close by, they do live in separate biomes and lead completely separate lives. So of course we have this village here. It's located just on the west of the entirety of the lands of Barovia. And in fact, it actually states here that just a mile to the west is where the fog, the ever-present mist, lays, and your players cannot go any further than that. So the real question is, why do your players come to Krezk? What is the purpose? Well, there are several hooks you can get your players to come here. The first being, you just tell them about it. You say that in the land of Barovia, there's only 3 main settlements: the village of Barovia, the village of Krezk, and the village of Valaki. And if your players have already been to the other 2, then they may want to go ahead and check this place out. Because Barovia sucks, because Valaki sucks, and then who knows, maybe this place doesn't suck. They will, of course, find out that it does suck in its own separate way. The second reason why your players might arrive to this destination is because they get told that there is an abbey here. And this abbey is to a one Saint Markovia. If they get told this piece of information, then they may go ahead and decide to check the place out, because any holy place in this land must be, safe from Strahd's advances, right? Well, actually no, but, your players can certainly think so. The third reason to come here is because they get told that this place may have some sort of relevance to them. Of course, in particular, it could be that their card reading leads them here. There could be some item or items stashed here in the village of Krezk or in the Abbey St. Markovia, or their fated ally could be found here. Any one of these or any other thing that you conjure up, whether they get told that the famous Esmeralda is in here, or if they get kicked out of the village of Valaki and have nowhere to go and decide to go ahead and make their way to the village of Krezk and escort some wine to this village so they can go ahead and get let in. There's a lot of way your players can get told to come here. But what happens when they actually arrive, and what are they going to find? Let's go ahead and dive right into that, shall we? Here in the village of Krezk, they will find that this place is actually relatively peaceful. Of course, the walls prevent most monsters from making their way inside, but of course, as we'll discover, there are some monsters that are located inside of this place. In the intro to Chapter 8, we get told pretty much all the information that you're actually going to need. The fact that this place is a quiet and peaceful village where they don't really do too much. In fact, they actually don't interact with the outside world at all. They don't really engage in trade and commerce. They have coops for their own little animals, and they draw water from a pool to the north there. And they simply live out their peaceful lives inside these very walls. They have these nice forests that protect them from the howling winds and from some snowfall, because it does in fact get much colder here because it's located further west. The burgomaster here comes from a royal line of the Krezkovs. Something fun to note here is, if you hadn't already picked up on it, every single one of the burgomasters has their name somewhere within their city's name, which is pretty unique. You might not catch up on that the first time you see that. The only thing that traditionally comes within these walls is wine, because, of course, the people need wine to not be so miserable all the time. Looming high above Krezk is the Abbey of St. Markovia, residing in which are monsters, specifically mongrel folk. They are mutated people that are all crazy and all weird and scary. And of course, presiding over them all is the abbot himself, a divine being who has come to this land and has been warped by the dark desires of this land. In this video, we'll be covering the village of Krezk itself, and in the next video, we'll be covering the Abbey of St. Markovia, because there's a lot to dive into with that. So let's go ahead and start diving into each of these areas, shall we? In Area 1, we have the road junction. Your players are going to be able to see that resting atop this hill is this quaint little village. They go ahead and go up the winding trail, and eventually they'll be able to make their way to the walls of Krezk itself. Much like the village of Valaki, this place is regularly closed, and the players are not going to be allowed to be let in unless they have something worthwhile. And it specifically states here in the text that the burgomaster himself does not want to entertain anybody. He knows that if there are people from a different land, which probably your players are going to look like they're from a different land because they're probably going to be some non-humans, and they're probably not going to be dressed like all Barovians. He's not going to like the idea of Strahd's enemies coming in here because he knows that's inviting danger, and his first and foremost concern is his people. And of course, we get all of this information wrapped up in Area 2, the Gatehouse. Your players are going to see that there are arrow towers, inside of which are actually archers, which actually have the scout stat block, which actually makes them a little bit better. They have a +4 to hit versus normally all the guards around here only have a +3. And of course, your players are going to see that you're not going to be allowed in. So if your players show up and ask to be let in, they're probably not going to be let in on their first go-ahead because the burgomaster doesn't want anything to do with it. He's going to turn them away. But he does need that wine. He needs his people to be happy. And he is going to go ahead and say, hey, if you've got wine, I'll go ahead and let you in because you're giving us a service. So that will be an incentive, of course, for your players to go to the Wizard of Wine's winery. If they've already completed the Wizard of Wine's winery quest, then you are going to have to start coming up with an idea of how long it takes to conjure up some of that wine. If your players were able to salvage some of the wine, they may go ahead and use it here. But if they already diverted that wine to another location or used it themselves, then you are going to have to sit down and say, okay, how long in-game am I going to have to make it where they can produce more wine? That's really something that comes down to your DMing style and how long you want this campaign to be. A lot of people run this campaign as a very short in-game time campaign, usually between a few weeks or maybe a month. I personally extend that out a little bit more because people get arrested or people go off and do crazy things. So it really comes down to your DMing style. I would say that you should probably have it where it takes a few days at least, because it doesn't make any sense that wine can just be produced in a single day. So you should probably have some sort of time mechanic behind all of that. So your players need this wine in order to get in here. But what if your players really want to come in here and they haven't already done the Wizard of Wine's winery, or they don't have the wine, but they really want to get into a walled settlement? Well, of course, they can go ahead and just bash down the door if they're strong enough, or they could go ahead and hop the wall. There are not enough guards to man every bit of the wall. In fact, there's only a single guard placed every 300 feet. So there's more than enough distance, especially with all the mist rolling around, that your players could go ahead and see where the guards are posted and find a place, hop over it, and get into the town no problem. So the burgomaster, Dmitry Krezkov, he doesn't want to let the players in unless they have the wine, of course. So if your players force their way in, whether they bash down the door or they go ahead and hop the fence or fly over or do whatever, he isn't going to actually try and stop them. He probably recognizes how powerful they are and is going to say, hey, I don't want anything to do with you guys. Just go ahead and do whatever you need to do and get out of here. Because realistically, your players, if they're only a third level party of 4, they'd actually be more than enough for the few guards that are here and all of the commoners that could raise up arms. It's sort of a sad state of affairs, really, that a really low level party could theoretically try and take over the town because no one will be strong enough to take them on. But hopefully you have a group of players that aren't scumbags and try and peacefully make their way in here. Once they do, they'll get to talking. The guards are going to go ahead and summon forth the Baron, and they're going to talk beyond the wall, behind the gate. And the burgomaster is going to say, hey, you know, go ahead and get us that wine, and I'll go ahead and let you in. But, you know, I kind of don't want you here because Strahd brought you here for a reason, I know that. While role-playing as Dmitry Krezkov here, you should go ahead and have him sort of a sallow demeanor, make him feel sad. And if your players roll a DC 12 insight check, they can determine that Dmitry is trying to hide the fact that he's distraught. He's grieving over the natural death of his youngest son, Ilya, the last of his children. And as we'll be getting into pretty soon here, he has had 4 kids, and all 4 of them are now dead. In Area 3, we have the village of Krezk itself. It's where we get a lot of the information about what's going on here. Here we can see that all the cottages in Krezk are single-story pine cottages with stone chimneys and thatch roofs. Pigs and chickens are kept in indoor pens so that they don't freeze because it does get colder in here. Sadly, the art that we're provided right here doesn't paint the picture that it gets cold here and that there is no snow, but it is presumed that it is chilly in here. So you should go ahead and tell them that there is maybe some snow falling down, or maybe there's already snow on the ground and it is considerably colder here. In an interesting twist, the largest house in this entire place, the Burgomaster's cottage, is located right inside of the gate here. It's the first building up, which is really odd. People that are in positions of power usually have their dwelling, somewhere farther away from the main gate, which gives this town sort of an interesting feel. At one point, long ago, perhaps whenever you made your way into the settlement, you'd always pass by the Burgomaster's mansion, and you could go ahead and see, oh, hey, there's the Burgomaster of this town, and maybe they'd go ahead and wave and shake hands or whatever, but obviously that time has long since passed. We get some information on the commoners' cottages as well. A typical cottage is only 200 square feet, yet contains 1d4 adults and 1d4 minus 1 children. Which is interesting because a lot of the other villages in the land of Barovia actually have more kids than there is adults. But also something kind of sad to note here is, in the village of Barovia and in the village of Voloki, we got a little table that we could roll on to see what is contained in that dwelling, whether they be vacant, or there's some monster in there, or there is cultists, or whatever. But here, it basically states that every single building is occupied with adults and kids, and all the animals that they have. So on paper, it does seem like this village is a lot more peaceful because they're not dealing with rats, or zombies, or cultists, or whatever. Every single building is occupied by occupants. But the fact that it states that there is 1d4 adults and 1d4 minus 1 children, that is painting a picture for us. It is telling that this place is slowly potentially dying out, because if people aren't having kids as frequently, then that is a bad sign. What's also very interesting to note is, instead of there being a central graveyard, every single cottage has its own graveyard where their family members are interred. All the caskets planted in the past decade are now empty, thanks to the abbot's sneaky mongrel gravediggers. We'll be getting into all that information in the Abbey of St. Markovia, but needless to say, those bodies are being put to good use. Much like all the other villages, Krezk has its own lore table, a table that you can go ahead and use to go ahead and plant and seed some information from the commoners of this little village to your players. And with these rumors and potential insights in the world, your players can learn many a thing and decide to act upon it. We get some good stuff like, residents never leave the village for fear of being attacked by wolves, direwolves, or werewolves. If your players have not already interacted with the werewolves of the land, this could be some added insight on the world, because they could be told, hey, oh man, there's werewolves? Where are they? What do they look like? Who are they? No one from the village visits the abbey anymore. The abbey bell rings at odd times, day and night, and the place is filled with baleful screams and horrible inhuman laughter that can be heard throughout the village. If your players arrive here and it's nice and quiet and peaceful, and then all of a sudden someone goes ahead and whispers, hey, don't be frightened, but at some point the bell's going to ring and you're going to hear some crazy laughter, and then that happens maybe an hour or two later, that's going to be terrifying. Your players are going to be going, what the heck's going on here? So deciding to give pieces of this information out is amazing. I wouldn't give all of that information right away, and I wouldn't go ahead and give some of the information at all until further on, because I think some of it is a lot more fun if they don't know anything about it. Such as, I wouldn't tell the players that the abbot has not aged a day in a century, because then your players are going to scrutinize the abbot a lot more. I think that the abbot should be portrayed as a little bit more trusting. Once again, we will be going into all that in the next video. Another thing about the Krezk lore here, much like with all the other lore in this book, is it's all true. It is actually all real. And unfortunately, I think that if your players are given the whole truth and nothing but the truth all the time, they are going to build up some expectations that nothing is ever wrong with whatever anybody ever tells them. So I would go ahead and seed in some false rumors alongside whatever real rumors that you have. I know for a fact I'm going to be working on a rumor table that can be present in your campaigns, and at some point that'll be down in the description below. We'll be working on that very soon. In Area 4, we have the Pool and Shrine. This pool is a pool that is being used by the people because this is the only way that they can get water if they never leave the town, right? And in fact, actually, this pool is blessed. The first time anybody ever drinks from this thing, they gain the benefit of a lesser restoration. Very nice. And once again, great story building and world building here. The water once had even greater magic, but has weakened over the years. The water otherwise tastes sweet and fresh. You know, that is very nice that your players, if they're suffering from some sort of minor malady, they can go ahead and drink from these blessed waters, as they are, of course, told that this was blessed by the Saint Markovia themselves. And, you know, just to paint a picture, once again, go ahead and use this art. Go ahead and show off that this pool is cool, like literally cool. It's cold all around because of the snow. And then, in fact, there is this gazebo. This gazebo has a statue of someone with their arms open. And anybody that knows anything about the Morning Lord would know that this is a depiction of the Morning Lord that is trying to embrace the sun. Another great fact about this location is that this is in fact one of the locations of the Fortunes of Ravenloft. If your card reading reveals that the treasure is here, the item is hidden underneath the gazebo. The gazebo must be torn down to reach it, however, and in doing so doesn't sit well with the locals. If the characters damage the gazebo and don't repair it, any charisma checks made to shift the attitudes of the villagers is made with disadvantage, which makes sense. If your players just show up to this land and all of a sudden start breaking everything, of course people aren't going to like them. Screw these people, right? And lastly, in Area 5, we have the Winding Road. Your players can see that this road climbs 400 feet, doubling back on itself twice before reaching the top. And, you know, that's something to note, that this place looks like maybe at one point it was well traveled because there is a road, but the people of the village of Krezk, also called Krezkits, do not use this thing. But that being said, there are still some people that use it, the mongrel folk of the Abbey. So the second half of this chapter goes into the Abbey of St. Markovia, the mongrel folk, the abbot himself, and all of the special events that take place. Those are very fascinating. Once again, gonna be in the next video. But what I wanted to go over right now is some things that we can go ahead and spice this place up with, because as written, Krezk is semi-lackluster, for a better term. Some of the strengths that the village of Barovia and the village of Vallaki had were that they were taken from older renditions of this module and have a lot more going on with them in regards of the NPCs to interact with and all the special events that take place. Unfortunately, Krezk didn't get as much attention and love. It makes sense. It has a certain feel to it. It has that certain charm about it. But I do think that this place does deserve a bit of its own location, a bit of its own flair and charm, and it should be somewhat of a staple in this campaign. Maybe not the village of Krezk itself, but the Abbey of St. Markovia, definitely. First off, to go ahead and change things up and make things actually feel relevant is somehow connect something from the outside world to the village of Krezk. And what do I mean by that? That could simply just be any NPC that the players know have a family member that lives within Krezk. And that could be as simple as your players meet someone and they say, hey, I actually have a cousin that I met when I was a kid, but they have moved to the village of Krezk and I haven't heard from them in years. Can you go ahead and tell me what's going on? And then when your players show up to Krezk, they start getting involved in what's going on here. And of course, we all know that the only thing interesting going on is the Abbey of St. Markovia. So how do we make things actually interesting in here? Well, let's go ahead and start diving into some things that are located nearby. The first being werewolves. This location could be under the assault of werewolves constantly. Maybe there's a reason why there isn't that many kids located in this location, and that's because the werewolves located in the werewolf den are coming in here, hopping over the walls, taking some kids and then hopping right back over. And this could paint a really sad tale that during the night, the parents go to bed not knowing if they'll wake up and have their kids still within their own dwelling. That could be scary. Maybe you go ahead and just leave the kids alone for this one and decide to take it out on the animals that are located inside. The village of Krezk is dependent on all of the animals that they have cooped up inside, all the chickens and pigs and whatever else that they have. Maybe if the livestock goes missing, then they will have to do anything and everything in their power to go ahead and stop it, whatever it is. Are the mongrel folk stealing all these animals? Are werewolves stealing these animals? Or is there someone located within these very walls that is getting a little too greedy? Something I always like to add a sense of dark mistrust amongst the peoples is sometimes people end up going missing. And the reason for that? Located inside these very walls is a single person. Not a monster, not an undead, simply a human being who is gone crazy and murdering people and eating them. I think that always leads to a fun fascination of, oh, there's people going missing, let's go ahead and discover what's going on. And maybe over the course of an investigation, they can find someone's house and they discover, of course, all of the remains of whatever wasn't eaten. And now they have to prowl around searching. Who is this murderer and what is going on? What are they doing? And then, of course, when your players finally confront this cannibal, they smite him down in a single blow because he's just a mortal man, nothing more, nothing major. And that'll add a sense of scariness that people are going crazy and willing to do such terrible things, even if they are just simple beings. Once again, I will be working on fully extending huge parts of the campaign, but that is for the future to come. In the meantime, for fleshing out locations, I highly suggest checking out Lunch Break Heroes, Mandy Mod, and Dragna Carta. All links in the description down below. Fantastic stuff. I can't wait to join amongst their ranks of adding amazing content to this amazing module. That is going to do it for me for this one. Shortish one, I know, but Krezk really doesn't have too much going on, and that is where, at some point down the line, fleshing out this place is going to be extremely useful. Because it is somewhat bare bones, but there's a lot you can pack into this thing. There is just so much you can do with this location that the small amount of words that were given just doesn't give it enough justice. So go ahead and tell me, how are your players going to get their way into Krezk? Are you going to force them to bring wine? Or are you going to go ahead and say that maybe they can go ahead and bribe the guards? Or maybe they can go ahead and sneak right on in? Who knows? What leads your party to Krezk? Do they have any motivation at all? Does one of your card readings suggest that they come here? Or maybe they don't. Maybe you chose totally random cards and none of them lead to Krezk, in which case Krezk is actually not needed. Because if none of your card readings lead you here, then there really isn't any point to coming here if they have no true motivations. Tell me how you plan on implementing Krezk or not in your campaigns, because I want to hear it. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my amazing patrons up here. You guys are awesome. Thank you so very much. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.